Hello, everybody, and welcome into Commodity Culture, where our goal is to make you a better investor in the commodities sector. My name is Jesse Day, and on this episode, I'm thrilled to welcome Lynette Zang to the program. An economist who's been involved in markets for decades as a student, banker, stockbroker, and precious metals and currency analyst, she is currently the CEO of Zang Enterprises. We're going to unpack the Genius Act and Stablecoins. Is this really just a way to implement financial control without issuing a central bank digital currency? We're going to discuss why Lynette thinks gold's true value should be closer to $30,000, with silver at over $1,000, numbers she thinks we could eventually reach as the fiat currency experiment comes to a disastrous end. We're also going to dive into the rise of authoritarianism worldwide and how it's connected to the fiat illusion and why sound money could be the remedy. All of this and so much more ahead in my conversation with Lynette Zang. Lynette Zang, great to have you back on Commodity Culture. It's been a while since we spoke, so I'd like to kick things off with a broad question, and that is, what are the main themes and trends you're currently watching when it comes to the gold and silver space that you think more investors and stackers should be paying attention to?
Well, in the gold and silver space, that is a very broad question. But I see that both on the spot market for both gold and silver, them coming to a critical point. With gold, what I'm seeing is a series of higher and higher lows as the top end have been kind of bouncing against it about 3 or 4 times. So I expect a breakout within the next reasonable period of time, short period of time. With silver, it's probably even a little bit more exciting because we are now really coming to that $40 and the next bump is at that 50. And when it goes above that 50, what you'll see on the spot silver chart, especially if you zoom all the way out, is the conclusion of a double cup formation, which is a cup formation is a major accumulation pattern. A double cup is, I imagine that to be quite powerful. So, I think that could happen maybe by the end of this year or into the first quarter, but either way, on both the spot markets, I see them extremely strong. And I think that a lot of that has to do with the level of chaos, the level of inflation, the level of geopolitical issues, um, many issues that are swirling around right now, central bank independence, all sorts of stuff.
When it comes to silver, obviously a tremendously undervalued metal by all metrics, and a lot of people are talking about $50 silver as the number, which would get us back to nominal previous all-time highs. But if we look at 1980, $50 in 1980 is like $196 today. And even if we go back to 2000, even if a lot of people say 1980 didn't count, that was an event that occurred, the Hunt brothers short squeeze, that wasn't a normal natural rise in the silver price. Some people will argue that, and they say we have to use the 2011 high as the more accurate one. Okay, but even in that sense, we're still looking at silver over $100. Do you think that triple digit silver price is in the cards in the near term? What are your thoughts there?
Yes, I definitely do think that triple digit price. Now, one thing that you mentioned about 80s with the Hunt brothers accumulating silver because they wanted to leave the US and form their own little country in Texas. However, the importance of that should not be just trivialized or ignored because what we were really dealing with was an overt manipulation by our government of the silver markets. And everybody was warned. And I have to say, Jesse, I have often wondered when these things that happened and they seem outrageous to me, like taking the gold away from the population, like taking the silver away from the population, like a sitting president admitting that they're going to manipulate the markets. And I used to wonder how they could get away with that why people didn't rise up and say, no, you can't do that. That's crazy. Well, I think we're living through that right now. And I'm seeing it happen. I think there's a lot of blindness that's going on. So I do actually consider the $50 mark nominal, to your point, to a very valid point, because these markets are manipulated. They are admittedly manipulated. And so if anybody really expects there to be any level of good price discovery with spot gold or spot silver, and I always make sure I say spot because that is just a contract. And when you're talking about silver, there's a chart from the LBMA that they came up, and of course we know that there was a huge rush of physical coming into America at the beginning of this year. And you can see the stores in the LBMA dropping in gold, dropping and then rising again and coming back pretty close to the levels that they had before whatever came out of the LBMA. I'm actually more interested in what came out of the BOE, but let's just stay with the LBMA for a minute, because the same kind of issue with the physical metal being shipped over happened with silver as well, but their stores are significantly lower than they were before that physical push into the US. So what does that tell you? It tells you that silver gets used up in industry. And just like the SLV silver ETF that is supposed to be a basket of silver, they couldn't put the basket together. So back in, I don't remember whether it was 21 or 20, but they changed the prospectus. SLV changed its prospectus so that they didn't actually have to pull a basket of silver in, but rather all they had to do, which is what they were designed to do anyway, which is imitate the spot silver market. That's telling. When you're talking about silver, that is so telling.
Well, one of the knocks on silver versus gold has always been that central banks are not buying silver. We've seen an interesting development. It's not as exciting as some are maybe making it out to be because it involves the SLV ETF that you've just been mentioning. But the Saudi central bank did recently purchase 932,000 shares of the SLV ETF. Fascinating development. I'm wondering what your thoughts are and if this could potentially be a trend moving forward where we see more central banks look to get exposure to physical silver.
I think we could see that because silver is the secondary monetary metal, but it is rather, I'm pretty sure that Saudi Arabia would be considered an administrator, which means that they would, you and I can't do it, but they would have the ability to take possession of the underlying silver. So I think that that is a manipulation to make that happen, because that can happen even more invisibly than what we were just talking about. And since silver is used across every single sector of the global economy, in solar, in medicine, et cetera, and gold is as well. Both of them are, but silver more so straddles that world. I think that this could also be a maneuver to ensure that they get their hands on the physical silver. At the end of the day, the holders of SLV won't. I mean, the normal holders of SLV wouldn't, but JP Morgan would and Saudi Arabia would. So I think it's a backdoor way to do it and have control of it. But the real problem is it would have to be done strategically. Like I'd be curious to see how much of a percentage of the holdings that they already have in silver that would actually represent. Um, because if they did take out the physical at the same time that SLV itself, that trust, is selling off bits of silver on a daily basis to pay the rest of the fees, the repercussions for the public would be huge. Those that think that they actually own silver with an SLV, they don't. They just own shares in a trust. But That could have some really significant significant impact on the risk transfer to the public.
And now a quick break to hear from our sponsor, ARC Silver Gold Osmium owner Ian Everard is considered one of the most honest and level-headed gold and silver dealers in the United States, praised even by his competitors. So give him a call today to take advantage of the specials right now. Silver Kangaroos 2023 1-ounce coins, mint fresh, only $2.47 over spot. Mint fresh silver maple leafs 2025 coins, 1 ounce, $2.87 over spot. While supplies last. Reach out today at 307-264-9441 or by email at ian@arcsgo.com, and make sure to tell him that Commodity Culture sent you. And now, back to the interview. Yeah, great point. Silver also recently added to a strategic minerals list by the Department of the Interior in the United States. Recently added, platinum also added as well. I wonder what your thoughts are there, if you think that's going to impact the silver market in a meaningful way.
As long as derivatives exist, right? So silver futures where they can create as much silver as possible. But then again, remember, we're coming to conclusion, and I do consider what happened in 1980 at that $50 mark. I consider this a massive double cup because it did come up to breach that level. And so when it goes above that 50, would 3 or even 4 digits in the silver nominal price, the price that we see, would that be outrageous? No, it's worth at a minimum $1,300 an ounce. And that's just based on the 20th to 1 that historically we were. These were both, well, it's a peace dollar. Okay. These are both $1, little $1 gold coin and a silver dollar. So that's a 20 to 1 ratio right there. So according to my calculations, you're looking at the true fundamental value of an ounce of gold at somewhere between $33,000 and $40,000 an ounce. So at $3,400, spot gold is a ridiculous bargain. But that also then means that silver's fundamental value at this moment is somewhere between $1,300 and $2,000. And remember, the more of this that they do, the higher those numbers go, because this is fiat money, government debt-based money. But gold and silver are sound money. Sound money is money that governments and central banks cannot inflate away. They can manipulate what you see through the use of garbage derivatives, but they cannot inflate it away. The point is they are both money. They're just the opposite sides of that money coin. And as this loses more and more and more of its purchasing power value, these go up in nominal terms. But what they really do is they create a bridge, because when one currency goes away, another one comes in. It's just that you need something and I need something. We need something that will hold its purchasing power intact to get us from one system into the next system. And dare I say it, even have the ability to take advantage of the opportunities that will present as these extremely severely overvalued fiat money assets. And real estate is actually not pure fiat money because it is a tangible as well, but it's severely overvalued. That's going to flip flop. So if you can hold your purchasing power intact, you're going to be able to have that wealth transfer your way.
I want to talk about the issue of gold revaluation, because this is something that's kind of re-entered the consciousness of stackers recently due to the fact that the Fed released a paper examining gold revaluation in other countries and its impact. This has led a lot of people to speculate that the Fed is considering a similar move, currently valuing their gold at $42.22 on the balance sheet. I've heard so many different opinions on this. Some people say it'll never happen. Some people say it has to happen. Some people are more in the middle. I wonder what your thoughts are. Is this a realistic proposition to revalue U.S. gold reserves? What would it actually accomplish for the U.S. government? And what could its wider implications be on the gold market?
Well, I personally do not see it. I see it as inevitable because what gold really does is it regains confidence. I mean, they want us to think that gold is an old relic, except wedding rings are generally in gold. Good as gold. It's in our vernacular, it's in our DNA, and it's used to regain public confidence after that massive failure, which I believe we are like this close to experiencing, and the hyperinflation. But make no mistake, every single country has a gold revaluation account. They're not going to do it at these levels because it does not reflect all the paper money that's been issued. So what I think we will see, and it's just a repetition of history because this has happened over 4,800 times. I don't think this time is any different. And that's really what the point is. But they have to, you have to kind of back up to move forward. If they did it now at the artificial level that the spot markets are, then it wouldn't have as great an impact if they wait until they finish blowing up the currency in a bout of massive hyperinflation. And what they do then is, of course, they lop off zeros so people think, well, they've got this under control. So you've got a loaf of bread. And I know this sounds outrageous, but it's not outrageous. It is just a repetition of history where a loaf of bread might go for, as it enters hyperinflation, a loaf of bread might go for $80,000 a loaf, right? But then what happens? They lop off 3 zeros or 4 zeros as they do that overnight revaluation. And so it goes from $80,000 a loaf to $8 a loaf. But so do your savings. And so do anything that you've accumulated in fiat. And frankly, so will the nominal price of gold. First, it'll go up massively, right? In the hyperinflation. But the difference between, say, your stocks and everything else, that drops dramatically immediately upon the revaluation. Whereas gold, it's on average, so I can't guarantee this, but on average will stay up at that level for about 9 months before it too gets revalued, but then it instantly begins to climb again in terms of that new currency. So that is what I anticipate seeing. I don't anticipate seeing it before we do hyperinflation because there is not yet the need to regain that public confidence. But I watch that like a hawk because that, my friend, is the only thing that's keeping all of this stuff together.
Well, speaking of trying to keep things together, the Genius Act, stablecoins, these are two things that you mentioned before we hit record today that you've been watching very closely. Walk us through the basics of what the Genius Act is and why you think the US government has introduced it.
Well, the Genius Act is the first legal foundation for cryptocurrencies and stablecoins in particular. I personally believe, there are many reasons why this administration made the choice to legalize that. There's definitely stakes in the game, but it had to happen anyway because we're moving into a new digital system. And what nobody really realizes yet, and I'm so glad I'm old because I've lived through this and I know how to recognize it and I've studied it since 1987. When President Trump signed the Genius Act, he changed the global monetary system. And I believe that, I'll put my technical neck on the line with this. I'm not even giving myself any wiggle room in here. Although, of course, I will say I could be wrong, but from the tip of my head to the bottom of my feet and every single area in between, I believe that this will now usher in the hyperinflation to burn off the debt that's being created. But make no mistake at all, when he signed that, the monetary system changed, period. Now, the fact that most people don't know about it yet is not relevant, but I was there in 1965. I was about 11 years old at that point, so I didn't really understand what happened, but I remember that period of time. And I was there in 1971 when we went off the gold standard. And I remember I was about 17 years old. So I definitely remembered all of the chaos and everything around that currency regime shift. And there is not one doubt in my mind that we just experienced that a couple of weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, whenever he did that, the beginning of this month. And that was about, look, this is the way I view President Trump. He is a change agent. This change had to happen because we have used up all the purchasing power value in this stuff. And once you do that, there is no place to inflate away. You must attack principle. But since at the same time, what's been happening is a shift in the allegiances on a global basis. So the rest of the world has, as we know, they've been turning away from the US Treasury market, which is the foundation of the global financial system. Well, when one market goes away, they got to find a new one. And so by legalizing the Genius Act and requiring all of the stable coins, at least that are issued by this country, to be dollar backed 1-to-1, what he's done is created a new artificial market, just like Kissinger did back in the 80s, 70s, and 80s with the petrodollar. So that's what he's attempting to do. And right now, according to a recent article, think about this because it's crazy, right? But in a recent article by the St. Louis Federal Reserve, they talked about the impact of the stablecoins. And right now, there's about 125 billion stablecoins in this market. And most of them, it could be, I don't have this number in front of me, but somewhere between, I think it's even 99% of currently all stable coins that are issued are dollar based. And they've been adopted majorly in third world countries, particularly in Africa, where their currencies are experiencing very, very high inflation. So what he's done is he's made sure that every new stable coin that's going to be issued by any corporations in the US, because that's who issues them. We don't want CBDCs here. Okay, well, I'm pretty sure we don't want stable coins either. But the CBDCs have a central location and there would just be one per country. The stable coins are issued by any corporation. So we'll have Amazon stable coins and Walmart stable coins and Kmart stable coins and, JC Penney, as well as JP Morgan, as well as Hong Kong stable coins, the yuan stable coins. So it is an extraordinarily fragmented market, but they are thinking that within the next 2.5 years, by 2028, they will go from about 125 billion stable coins to $2 trillion in stable coins. And they are busy creating the legal framework of safe harbors and exemptions and all of these things. So if I take you back to 2008 and the great financial crisis, where what these bankers did was disgusting and vile and cruel and destroyed so many people's lives, nobody went to jail. And they didn't go to jail because legally they didn't do anything wrong. Ethically, it was horrible, but legally it wasn't. And they're setting that same kind of system up now and encouraging all of this experimentation, and guess who's the guinea pigs, and guess who's just about the right size to fail. But that's also why I say that this is what's ushering in the hyperinflation, because the easier and cheaper it is to create new money and spend new money, the more will be created, the more will be spent. And really, how do you even value any of these cryptocurrencies? I mean, if they do a physical representation, because that's all this is, these aren't Bitcoin or Ethereum or XRP. They are the physical representation. And I find it so interesting that they make them look like 1 ounce gold coins. Psychological.
Yeah.
And disgusting.
Very fascinating. Yeah. And, inflation is theft. And when theft is made legal, you are being ruled by criminals. That's the situation we're in. Governments are essentially criminal cartels that have legalized their own crimes. And the bankers and central banking system is a huge part of that. The fact that people have not woken up to that en masse is a little disheartening. A topic we're going to get into a little bit later. But first, I want to highlight something you recently posted on X. A possible shift in the composition of the Fed's portfolio of Treasury holdings could result in the central bank buying nearly $2 trillion of bills over the next 2 years, according to Bank of America. You then added the hashtag got gold. Are we looking at Japanese-style yield curve control up ahead, where the Fed could end up being the main buyer of U.S. Treasuries to try and keep yields low?
100%. So, but now think about these numbers, right? If you've got 2 trillion coming in through stablecoin issuance and the Fed doing an about face onto their balance sheet of 2 trillion, that pretty much covers all that new debt that comes out in that big, beautiful bill, isn't it? Doesn't it? I mean, it's just to keep the game going, and they can, as long as the public maintains confidence in the system. Because bank to bank confidence, that ended in 2008, central bank to central bank confidence. And if you want me to go into any of these in more detail, but that ended in 2015. Market to central bank. Remember that they would tell the banks what they're going to do. Forward guidance. We're going to tell you what we're going to do so you can get into position. But that ended in 22. So there's only one layer of confidence that's left in the system, and that's the public still hoping beyond hope that this can regain some of its value. That's hopium. That is not a good plan. And it doesn't really work either, because the cards are stacked against you.
I think that's the first time I ever saw you bring out the bag of hopium. I love it.
I actually got it from Tiger Stacker, so I have to give him credit because he did it. And I'm like, I love that.
That's awesome. I want to talk about the cost of living crisis, because that doesn't appear to be going away anytime soon. The cost of basic necessities has gotten absurd. Just speaking about my own country, I live in Serbia, where things are about half the prices in Canada. It's not as good as it sounds, because for the people who live here, they're making such small amounts of salary that it's the same for them as it is around the world. But as a Canadian living here and making a Western income, it's insanely cheap. And whenever I go back home to return to Canada, I'm always stunned by why the population hasn't revolted when I step into the grocery store and see the prices. And this is happening all over the world. A huge portion of the population has zero emergency savings, literally living hand to mouth. Is this trend set to get better or worse in your view? And is the government using in the US, is the government using the continued rise of the stock market as their data point to kind of say, yeah, shut up, look how strong our economy is, despite how much Main Street is suffering?
That is such a good point. Yeah, this is definitely due to get a whole lot worse. And generally speaking, historically, 80% of the population ends up in abject poverty as we go through this, and the middle class is absolutely wiped out. Though that trend really started around 2000. So really, it's not like any of this is new. We're just now at a point where, I mean, you just see these buy now, pay laters. in mainstream all the time because people cannot even afford food. So we were trained not to have gardens, right? To be dependent on the grocery store. And we got a warning in 2020 with COVID when you couldn't get your food from the grocery store, when those shelves went bare. And what did that reveal? The supply chain issues, but that has not been repaired. So I expect that to get much worse. And that's why I became a prepper, because food becomes the single biggest issue for people. But also on top of the huge food issue, which is getting worse, is also the water issue that's getting worse. And that too is a global issue. And so, when 2008 hit, just like I 100% knew that that was the end of the system as we knew it, and I became a prepper, I could tell you that's how it feels to me with the stable coins. So there is absolutely zero doubt in my mind. And I developed my mantra from that based on what I knew that I needed. So that is to create surety in food, water, energy, security, barterability, wealth preservation. Community is arguably the single most important part of that, as well as shelter, because these are all the things that we need to lead a reasonably stable life. And community has risen to the top because I started right after 2008, and I'm more prepared than probably anybody else I know, but I'm still not 100% prepared. I could deal with it if it happened tomorrow because of all the steps that I've taken, but we don't have that kind of time anymore. And so it is critically important that we come together in community. Go to your local farmers markets wherever you are. In Serbia, I think there's a lot more community, isn't there, where people come
Oh,
together to
yes.
help each other?
Yeah, so that's one of the things I love about this country. I think because of the hard times they've been throughout their history, the Yugoslavian Communist Empire, the Balkan Wars, which were literally yesterday. That was like in the 90s, which is just yesterday in history. I find a helping hand everywhere I look in Serbia, and I don't even have to ask for it. So there's also,
Exactly.
everybody here is Orthodox Christian, practicing Orthodox Christian, so they tend to live the tenets of their faith. So for all those reasons, Serbia is a great place to be for community.
Well, unfortunately, that's not really what we have in the US. You could speak more to Canada from that,
We
but
don't have it in Canada either.
yeah,
Trust me,
I
that's why
didn't
I'm
think
here.
so.
That's why I'm here and not there.
And that's why it's so important that we take the steps, because I will tell you this, and I've done this a long time and I encourage everybody to do. When you're looking in the mirror in the morning, you got to ask yourself, if not me, who? And if not now, when? Because if we don't take responsibility for ourselves and our fellow man, then then the life that they have planned for us, which is a full surveillance economy. And we got a little snicker snack of that from Canada and the trucker strike, right? Where boom, it was a perfectly legal and peaceful strike. And they shut down all of those accounts. And then anybody that even donated $5, probably even a buck to these truckers, they shut down those accounts too. And that was shocking happening in Canada. Shocking. But it was, my mom used to have a saying, and I used it with my daughters too. When someone tells you who they are, believe them. Because a lot of times people, oh no, well, I can make them better, or blah, blah, blah. No. And so the government in Canada, which is the US's closest neighbor, well, Mexico is there too, but the government in Canada that we thought was the most like ours just showed the colors. And I think our government's showing their colors too. Believe them. It ain't there. None of this is happening for yours and my benefit. This is happening for those that have been chosen to succeed. I want to level the playing field. And for what I can see, the only way to level the playing field is to get sound money back in the system again. And it has to be redeemable, because if it's not redeemable, it's not going to work. We need to take our power back as citizens. And that is my battle. Well, not just my battle, but I am on the advisory board of Citizens for Sound Money. And I do travel around the world talking about sound money and trying to get it back in the system again. That's physical gold, physical silver, but it has to be redeemable.
I'm 100% behind that mission. You spoke about how shocking it was to see Canada's move towards authoritarianism. Not only did they freeze people's bank accounts who donated to the truckers, they banned all citizens who did not take their prescribed medications from leaving the country. You are not allowed to get on a plane. One of the greatest human rights violations ever committed by a so-called Western democracy in modern times. And yet everybody in Canada pretends it didn't happen or thinks it's actually great that it happened, which is insane. The population was actually a big part of the problem. But I'm not going to rant about how much I hate my home country of Canada here. I also want to touch on the rise of authoritarianism in many countries. In the UK, we're seeing people get thrown in prison for social media posts. In Germany, the same thing. All across the EU, they're trying to implement this new Digital Safety Act where they want to police the internet. It's getting pretty Orwellian out there.
Yeah.
Is this a sign and a symptom of the end game of this global fiat currency experiment? When you have funny money, when the money itself isn't real or backed by anything, you get into this endless debt loop. And as governments get more and more desperate and realize that they're losing their grip on power and eventually they have to face reality, they need to subjugate the population as much as possible so that when a collapse does happen, they have complete control and they can maintain their power. Is that how you see things?
That was so eloquently put. Absolutely eloquently put. And yes, that is exactly how I see them, which again makes the community piece of this and you getting to safety. And safety is having surety in everything that you need so that if the government says jump, you don't have to say how high because you don't need them. Right? You have surety in your food and your water and all your necessities, and you're surrounded by community. And on a global basis, we've got to, all you got to do, there's 8.4 billion people in this world. And where one person could not make a difference, if 3% of us come together, I think we've got a shot. And if we don't do it, what's going to happen to our children? I'm not really worried about myself personally because of all of the choices that I've made right along the way. I'm not even really worried about my children because of those choices, but I am worried about everybody else's children. And I am worried about my children's 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 children because they want to take us back to pure feudal times and they want absolute control. And we aren't in a democracy. We haven't been in a democracy in a long time, nor is this really a capitalist circumstance. This is fascism. The merger of corporation and government is fascism. That happened back in 1913 and 1914 when our government started on this path and had, believe it or not, but I have the evidence for it, which you can have if you want to, but what did the government do? What did our government do and our central bank do? They converted corporate debt into Federal Reserve notes. And then they had those Federal Reserve notes. I mean, it's genius. It's evil genius, but it's absolute genius. I mean, look at how they did it. And I show you because they're doing the same thing now. So, if you recognize it, you can make a difference. But here you go. Okay. This was money. $20 gold piece, 1 ounce of, roughly 1 ounce of gold. Okay. This was our money, but oh my goodness, how heavy and inconvenience it is to carry it around. So let's just do it with this, a $20 gold certificate. Hey, it has that little gold thing there and you can walk into the bank with this and walk out with this. And that created restrictions around what governments could do. But at the same time, in 1914, they converted a whole boatload, like 10 times the amount of gold we held in deep storage, to this Federal Reserve note. Can you see how close this resembles that? And they allowed them to run alongside of each other for 20 years, All three of them, absolutely interchangeable. So when these two things went away, we still had this, and people went, well, nothing's changed. When in reality, we gave up our power because we no longer had a mechanism to check the government and the central banks. They did the same darn thing in 1965, because up until 1965, our money was still silver. It was silver right here. You can see it on the rim. And then they came out with new quarters that look almost identical, except on the rim, you can see a copper color. But hey, they made sure that they fit all the vending machines and nobody would notice. And then to our earlier discussion on what happened with the manipulation of silver. And so what do we have is garbage, right? And that's what happens as the money devalues. The old money, right? The gold money, well, they printed $2.4 for every 20th of an ounce that they had in circulation. So it became more expensive to mint a $20 gold coin because they devalued it so much. So they had to get rid of it, and also our control. Same thing with silver. And now the same thing is happening with pennies, because pennies used to be 85% before 1982. They were, 95% copper. Then they went down to 15% copper. Now it costs 3.9 cents to make 1 penny. The penny is going away. But the other thing that I really want to point out, because I don't hear anybody talk about this, and I think this is incredible. Does anybody ever ask how the central banks make the money that they need to stay alive? Seigniorage, right? So it costs something like 9.4 or 9.7 cents to make this $100 bill. Now you and I have to work $100 worth to make this bill, but the difference between the cost to create it and what they sell it for, which is 100, is all theirs. So you have to wonder, and then if they have anything left at the end of the year, that goes to the Treasury. We are now in the 4th year of the Federal Reserve losing money. And you have to wonder, how is that happening with all of the money that they created and all of that seigniorage? How are they losing money? You think that doesn't matter? No, they just don't want you to look at that. But that too, there are all of these indications that we are at the end of this currency's life cycle. Let's take back our control and have a say in the new monetary system. I've never seen an opportunity in my career as good as this opportunity right now. If we can get 3% of the global population to convert into gold and silver, not all of it, just some of it, that could be enough. That's what it took for the Revolutionary War. 3% of the population. So I'm thinking 3% this time.
Fantastic discussion, Lynette. Tell us about Zang Enterprises, the work you do there, and where people can find it.
Well, we are really keen on education, and we also have, I've been studying currency life cycles, like you know, since 1987. And there are all of these repeatable patterns that have happened, goodness gracious, over 4,800 times. There's so many currencies, that government debt-based currencies, that do not exist anymore. And so our work there, we have a layered strategy, so that no matter where we are in this trend cycle, you are in the right position. And it's based upon those repeatable patterns. I'm easy to find, LynetteZang.com, on YouTube and Twitter, at the Lynette Zang, on Instagram and Facebook, at Lynette Zang. And for those that can get through, and actually you can, I don't know if the 833 number works all over the world, but our toll-free number is 833-GLDZANG, or 833-453-9264. So we're very visible, and we are really there to help you understand what's happening so that you can make educated choices that puts your best interest first.
Great. Well, I'm going to put links to all of that in the description below. Thank you once again, Lynette, for coming on the show and sharing your knowledge with the audience.
Anytime, Jesse. And one of these days, I just should get to Serbia. I'm actually going to Malaysia in about 3 weeks. So I'm really excited about that because I've never been to that part of the country.
Is that for the Nomad Capitalist Live event?
It is. I know. I'm so honored. I'm so excited. I have to do the best job ever. I'm working on it.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Lynette, and let's circle back and do this again soon.
I hope so. You take care, Jesse. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us today. Take advantage of ARC Silver Gold Osmium specials. Silver Kangaroos 2023 1-ounce coins only $2.47 over spot. Silver Maple Leafs 2025 1-ounce coins just $2.87 over spot. While supplies last. Reach out to owner Ian Everard today at 307-264-9441 or by email at ian@arcsgo.com, and make sure to tell him that Commodity Culture sent you. And I'll see you guys in the next episode. Commodity Culture is a series on commodities and natural resources. If you would like to see more, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell notification so you're always up to date with the latest episodes.